talk a lot about, yep. We talk a lot about charging infrastructure. We have now 215% more public chargers than we had in 2015. So that is on a trajectory up. What we're not doing, so the three legs of the stool include the cars, the charging, and then the human behavior side. And we give way more attention to charging infrastructure than we do to the human side, and it's the thing that's missing. And that's what this session is all about. So a few relatively interesting things about the data. For example, 70% of people don't think they can charge with a 110 plug. 33% of EV owners think they're paying, only 33% think that they're paying less for electricity to fuel their car than they would with gasoline. So we have these things. So I'm going to ask you guys a quick poll, see what you know about the industry. So can we go ahead and pull up the first one of those? I believe. All right. Oh, I guess we had this question. So I will go ahead and answer that one. I thought we had new questions, but I will pose those myself. And unfortunately, this question doesn't include those of you who already own one. So my apologies for that. All right. So what we've got is sometime later is the answer. So 57% said, not now. I don't know why you're waiting because the cars really work well. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. And so I'm going to give you the punchline for a couple of the other questions that I was going to ask, and we can save a little bit of time for that. So one of the questions was how much has the number of people who say that they're very aware of EVs in general gone up over the last 6 years? The answer is none. It's really pegged out at right around 18–19% who say they're very aware. So we're not doing something on the communication side. We asked this question again nationally. How many of you are actively shopping for an EV? Again, this number has not budged over this period of time, 2015. It's really almost exactly the same at about 18–19%. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to have our specialists, our experts, tell us little bitty things that can add up to huge changes, is the way I look at it, in accelerating market adoption. So I'm going to start with my very basic question for each one so you can get a quick introduction for each of them. So, which is, so I'm going to start with Jamie. It says, do you already have an EV? If so, what type it is? And what's the thing that surprised you about it? And if you don't have an EV, what are your future plans? And I'll go through each one of you real quick. All right, Jamie.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I do not currently have an EV, but my future plans involve hopefully the cool F-150 coming out. I've always wanted a truck and never bought one. So now clean options out there. I'm pretty excited about it.
Great. All right. And Margaret.
We had the e-Golf. It just came off of lease, and my husband had scratched it so much that he and the dealer wanted it back so badly that they took it without us ever having to repair the scratches. So can't wait until the supply chain is back. Can't wait to get another EV. They were the most fun thing to drive. My kids loved it. You know, we're just learning to drive. Just great. Love it.
Fantastic. I'm glad it has scratches on it. So, John.
We don't currently have an EV, but it is in our plans. We're starting to shop for a new car now. We're expecting our first child in the springtime. So needing to upgrade from our old sedan to something a little larger in the near future.
And we just have a video of I think it's a 4-year-old plugging in an electric car. I'm not recommending that, but it is something that is possible. And Priya, did we finally get you in? I know that we're having all kinds of technical difficulties. If you take yourself off mute. I think I just saw her admitted. So,
Can you hear me?
yes,
We
I
can't
can
hear you.
barely hear you, so it's your mic problem right now.
Okay. I'll just check.
Yeah. So can you chat with our tech to get that fixed? Because we're not able to hear you except very, very, very faintly. So as we move on, so Priya, I'm going to have to skip over you for the first speaker and move to John to kick us off, and then I'll move back to you, hoping that that audio has fixed. So John, welcome. Your title is Characterizing Strategic EV Market Segments, EV Converts. And John has more than 9 years of experience working on EV incentive programs with the Center of Sustainable Energy. He's lately focused on program design and planning, as well as on identifying, describing EV consumer market segments. This is near and dear to my heart. John and I had a wonderful conversation, and I'm going to kick it off. Everybody has basically 8 minutes to get going. I'm going to give them a reminder, just a subtle reminder that I get the little cowbell at 9 minutes if they go over, and we'll stop them at 10. So John, turning over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. Let's see if that works. Can we see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. So hi, hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good day, depending on where in the world you are. My name is John Anderson. I'm a senior manager on the Transparency and Insights team at the Center for Sustainable Energy. I'm going to spend a few minutes today talking about EV converts, and did want to start off by thanking my co-author, Brett Williams, who worked on this project with me and has done a lot of work around this, leading this market segmentation work at CSC. So a quick note, let's see if I can get my slides to change here. There we go. A quick note about the Center for Sustainable Energy. CSE is a 501c3 nonprofit with a one-word mission to decarbonize. We're administering programs for state and local government agencies, utilities, other groups, and largely centered around clean transportation and the built environment. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about one of our transportation programs shortly here. So today in our discussion of EV converts, I'll start with a bit of background about the topic. What is an EV convert and why do we care? We'll talk a little bit about how we went about looking at EV converts, what we found, and we'll finish up with a bit of a discussion about what it means and how people can make use of it. So first things first, given the reality of limited resources, how should programs aimed at expanding the EV market best concentrate their efforts in terms of outreach and education? And we can think of this in a couple of different ways. One method is to pick low-hanging fruit to reinforce what's already working. We can look at expanding market frontiers and explore how to break into the mainstream new car market in a way that the EV industry will need to in order to realize widespread success. And we can support equitable access to clean transportation. We need to do better than simply reaching the mainstream part of the market. We need to go beyond it to enable access for groups that have been historically excluded from the new car market entirely. And we're going to focus a little bit on this second group, expanding market frontiers, and specifically this EV convert segment. And this is a group of people who had little to no interest in buying an EV when they started looking for a new car, but went on to acquire one anyway. And we think about EV converts as a group along this path from the kind of enthusiastic core of EV adopters, early adopters, to mainstream car buyers. And we'll talk a little bit about where they are along that path as we go here. So in terms of the data underlying this analysis, the California Air Resources Board's Clean Vehicle Rebate Project is a cash incentive offered for purchase or lease of qualifying electric vehicles here in California. The program has rebated more than 400,000 vehicles, amounting to nearly $1 billion in incentives. And as part of implementation of the CVRPE, we administer a survey, and this goes out to non-fleet respondents. They're invited to participate. in recent eras of the program, about half the market has participated in the program. We typically have about a 20% response rate to the survey. And we've done some analytical filtering for this converts work, and we're going to be talking about 5,500 responses to our survey today. So in the survey, we ask respondents to describe their interest in EV when they started looking for a new car. Response options ranged from no knowledge to no interest, all the way up to I was only interested in an EV when I started looking. And we define EV converts as those who had some interest or less when they started looking for a new car. In the data set we analyzed, this was about a quarter of the respondents. A lot more detail about this analysis was published in the journal Energies. You can find the link to that article here if you want to dig into the details. I'm going to skip over most of the technical side of things, but we'll talk a little bit about the analysis next here. So this work was done in two parts. First, we looked at EV converts descriptively, looking for differences between converts and the rest of the participants split out by vehicle type. So we looked at PHEVs and BEVs separately. We then used a logistic regression to look for associations between characteristics and whether someone's an EV convert, holding other factors constant. So this allows us to say more confidently if a given factor is related to increased or decreased odds of being an EV convert. Descriptively, we see that EV converts differ from other consumers along a couple of dimensions. First, with PHEV converts, we see the plug-in hybrid converts typically identify as white less often than PHEV converts, or PHEV participants rather, more generally, but slightly more than the new car market as a whole. PHEV converts also tend to be younger than participants more broadly, and tend to actually be more similar to the new car market on that characteristic. And household income also tends to be lower than for other participants, more like new car buyers. And this reinforces this notion that PHEV converts may be along this path from that enthusiastic core that I mentioned to the mainstream new car buyers. Looking at BEV adopters on the right here, we see similar trends, but in some cases, the convert group even goes beyond the new car market, specifically for non-white race, ethnicity, identity, and age. So as I mentioned earlier, we took this a step further and used logistic regression to look for association and importance of that association in terms of characteristics that change the odds of a consumer being an EV convert. And we looked at a wide range of characteristics that can broadly be characterized as demographics, household characteristics, regional characteristics, purchase motivations, and transactional factors. We're going to skip right to what was significant and important here. So on this slide, we're looking at meaningful characteristics rank ordered by their contribution to the model. And this is ordered based on the BEV column with common characteristics highlighted in green text on the left here. So we'll focus on the top three factors. For BEVs, we see that converts aren't spending a lot of time researching EVs when they're looking for a new car. This isn't a group that's being converted through EV enthusiast channels like EV-specific blogs or things like that. Car shows, for example. Perhaps a group that's more easily reached through traditional advertising mediums. BEV converts are also more likely to purchase a non-Chevrolet, non-Tesla vehicle relative to Chevrolet vehicles. And this may suggest that Chevy vehicles are pre-converting people to EVs, perhaps due to the longer range of the vehicle. And you can think of pre-converting as something before they started thinking about a new car, got them thinking about EVs before they started research. We're also finding that BEV converts are not highly motivated by reducing environmental impacts, suggesting those with interest in protecting the environment already know about EVs and are interested when they start looking for a new car. You can see PHEV and BEV converts largely overlap, but the BEV converts have quite a few more meaningful predictive factors. And but one that's unique for PHEV was that people value saving money on fuel were more likely to be PHEV converts than those who don't value that highly. So what does it all mean? These findings suggest that there are some, like we mentioned earlier, pre-converters to EV adoption. Things like interest in cars, technology, and the environment might lead people to knowing about EVs before they start looking, and perhaps cause some interest before that process starts, pre-converting them to the idea of buying an EV. We're also seeing that EV specific practical perks like HOV lanes, maybe doing some pre-conversion there as well. When we're thinking about reaching EV converts, these motivations, these considerations may not be as impactful for actually doing that conversion than some other factors. So what are EV converts like? So we see that they're a little bit more practically minded than EV adopters as a whole. Tend to be younger. Unique to BEV, the converts tend to be lower income, more often identify as non-white. Oops. In terms of messaging, converts may be more effectively reached by concentrating on financial benefits of owning an EV. They tend to be motivated by saving money on fuel. As I mentioned earlier, might be lower income, and perhaps think of EVs as too expensive when they're looking at viable vehicle choices or begin searching for a new car. We see that EV enthusiast information channels might not be the best mechanisms for reaching converts. They aren't spending much time researching EVs before they start looking to buy one. So that leads us to hypothesize that maybe traditional advertising channels might be more effective mechanisms, advertising during the Super Bowl rather than trying to reach people through car shows, for example. Finally, there's some evidence that incentives are helping, especially for BEVs. We're seeing higher likelihood of being an EV convert for people who found the rebate essential in making it possible to buy a new car. This is the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project. We're also seeing that there's a higher likelihood of EV conversion in the Central Valley relative to the Bay Area, perhaps suggesting that other supportive policies, of which there are a lot in the Central Valley, might be helping convert people into EVs. So I'll stop there. I think hopefully I'm under my time. I didn't hear the cowbell, so that's good news.
Yes. I'll ask you a quick follow-up question. Thank you, John.
Sure.
So you've looked at current EV owners, the ones that seem to own lots of Teslas, for example, and the next version, the people who want to buy a car 2 years, 3 years, 4 from now. We're finding that they're a lot more price sensitive for things like fuel, et cetera. What are you finding is the big differences between those two groups, the ones that already have versus the ones that want?
Right. So in this analysis, we're looking at people who actually were converted. So we're looking at people who went on to adopt the new vehicles or the electric vehicles rather than who are planning to adopt in the future. There's some other work done by Ken Karani at UC Davis that looked into more of the likelihood to buy in the future and those sorts of things. That's some interesting work. But like I mentioned, as we kind of move towards this mainstream group, we think we're going to be seeing more practically minded consumers who are more interested in this, the cost savings associated with EVs. Though the vehicles are more expensive upfront with incentives, hoping to address some of those upfront cost issues. We think this group is going to be more likely to respond to fuel savings over time and things like this. So I think the convert work reinforces that by kind of indicating that the traditional motivational drivers for EVs, concern for the environment, wanting to be out on the front of the new technology space, aren't really super important to converts. So it's more on the practical side of things.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. And I realize that my own video, which appears to be on, is not working. That's probably a benefit for many of you, just based upon my looks, but we will maybe try to get that fixed at some point, but it doesn't really matter because it's really about the speakers now. Priya, do we have your audio fixed at this point?
I'm hoping so.
Yes, we do. Fantastic. So glad to have you on board here. Priya's with the University of California, Davis, all the great research that they do there, ITS Davis, and her presentation has the willingness to pay for alternative fuel vehicles changed over time, evidence from California. So it really feeds right into what John was talking about. And so, Priya, if you could do a quick introduction of yourself and then get going, and we'll set the timer for 8 minutes.
Hi, so I'm Debapriya or Priya. So I'm an assistant professional researcher with the Plug-in Hybrid EV Research Center at ITS Davis. And there I'm working on like mostly the market for EVs and like role of incentives, as well as to some extent on charging behavior. This paper or this topic that I'm presenting today actually started when I was in grad school, and I was looking at the California Vehicle Survey data that the Energy Commission collects periodically, and I had looked primarily at the 2012 data. And for when this conference came up, and I figured that it's a good time to revisit some of this data and see like what we are getting from this this choice data, the California Vehicle Survey that was done in 2012, 16, and 19 at some decent time points over the past decade, and see if there's any change that we can observe. So that is basically how this project started, and I'm going to show some results from there. But I would like to mention one thing is that my talk is, it says it's about willingness to pay. And when I started looking into the data, what I figured that the survey has changed considerably. And it is not a good idea, for lack of words, to like do an comparison from 2012, 16, 19. There's a lot changed other than the market has evolved in terms of the data collection process. So what I'm going to show is some snapshot analysis of the data at the 3 time points. So should I start my presentation?
Yes, please. Great.
Okay. So you
If
can
you-
see my full screen?
Yes.
So just we all know, I've been working in this field, that the market for plug-in electric vehicle, and to some extent the fuel cell vehicles, have been going up over the past decade, with California being primarily the leader in the market. 39% of the national sales, as the slide says here, comes from California. But I heard a previous speaker also talk about Ken's study, and Ken at the PHEV Center collects data as well periodically in California, surveying car owning households in the state, and like looking at the 2014 survey data and the 2017 survey data at questions that give you an idea about how awareness about EVs are changing, whether people can name a plug-in electric vehicle, or they have tried to gather some information. In all those respects, what he observes is that there's no considerable change in the awareness as well as understanding of EVs. And in a more recent data in 2019, the pattern is kind of similar. So here we are taking kind of a similar approach using a different data set that the Energy Commission collects, as I mentioned, and I'll be looking at the 2012, 2016, and the 2019 data. So the first sample, or the first data, was collected in 2012. And here, all my analysis, I'm splitting up by the type, the vehicle holding. So 1 vehicle, 2 vehicle, and 3 vehicle households. And we see that there are some households that already had an alternative fuel vehicle, but primarily they were the first generation, either BEVs, or it was actually included, the definition at that time included hybrid vehicles as well. So it's the share of BEVs were actually much smaller than what we see here under the number of people who owned plug-in or alternative fuel vehicles. But the demographics kind of shows that primarily there are a good share of low-income households that we want to attract in the market, or the middle-income households, and and a big share of these alternative fuel vehicle households were actually in the high income sector, high income category. With each of these data sets, I did run a conditional logit model with primarily the choice data set that asked people to, respondents to choose from 4 vehicle options that vary in terms of the fuel type or the body type, fuel cost savings, and a number of other attributes, as you see here. And considering what kind of vehicles they say they would like to replace or add to their fleet, we look at how these different vehicle attributes contribute towards the choice of vehicles, or in this case, battery electric vehicles. So what we see is that the usual attributes that matter come out even in the regression results, with price mattering, as well as the time to refuel or maintenance cost. All these concerns that relate to battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids are continue to matter in the choice of vehicle. This is for a 2 vehicle household, these results, and we see that there's a negative coefficient on moving to a battery or a plug-in hybrid or a hydrogen fuel vehicle compared to a gas car in 2012. These were the initial stages of the market, and as I mentioned, like most of the PEV holders or alternate fuel vehicle holders were in the very high income group, and experience did matter, as you would see in the last row. And if you actually owned an alternative fuel vehicle, it made you more likely to switch to a battery or a PHEV or a fuel cell vehicle. Now, in 2016, it continues to, the PV ownership is still in the higher income categories in 2 and 3+ vehicle households, but like there were like 12% of the households who showed that they expressed interest in moving and considering PVs as their next vehicle purchase. And what we see is that it's similar, like it continues to be the case that among the people who expressed interest, it is a higher share of the people already had PV experience. So if you already have a battery electric or a plug-in hybrid, you were more likely to say that you want a BEV or a PHEV. There's a almost negligible share of people who mentioned that they want a fuel cell vehicles. And once again, what we notice in the conditional logit model results, and I can share it with, if you want to look at it, I didn't want to put up a big table, but fuel cost savings can matter considerably among like all households. Price did not come out to be as much as a significant result, except for lower income categories, but fuel cost savings were definitely had a very strong effect on vehicle choice. But what was different is that compared to the general population, if we have a model that focuses on with PV owners or people who had PV experience, then we see that they tend to notice the price or the MPGE, fuel cost savings, range of the vehicle. The coefficients are significant, as well as like have a higher value than the model that does not include PEV owners, or it's the more general population.
And Priya, you've got about 1 minute.
So then moving on to the 2019, what we see is that there are more 1 vehicle households that are entering the market, though primarily it continues to be in the more multi-vehicle households. But in this sample, we see a much higher percentage of households that expressed consideration for plug-in electric vehicles for their next vehicle purchase. And what we also noticed when we moved from 2019 compared to 2016, that there is a higher share of people, even without PEV experience, who expressed interest in buying a plug-in electric vehicle as their for their next purchase. And fuel cell vehicles also start getting some traction in the market, but there are some other reasons considering how the sample was collected that we need to keep in mind when interpreting this result. And we continue to see that once again, all these factors that we talk about, range and fuel cost savings or refueling time, they matter more for people who already own a plug-in electric vehicle than the general big car owning households or households that have expressed interest in buying a vehicle in the near future. So just to wrap it up, we do see that there is a higher preference for PEVs and it's improving over time. And there's a higher share of PEV ownership or like intention to get one among one vehicle households and also among the middle income group, like the 100K to 150K or even the 50,000 to 100,000 group. But when we go back and look at the logistic model regressions, we see that all these benefits or concerns that we talk about, it's related to PEV adoption, it is mostly observed among those who already have experience. So basically say that there's a lot to do still in getting awareness among the more general car buying population than what we currently have. Thank you. That's very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
I rushed it.
I know it's so much information to come, and I find this fascinating as well, and it goes along with the converts that John was talking about, which is looking forward to what the trends are and what people want in cars. So I'm going to ask you a personal opinion question about, with all this research, is that which type of car model is missing, looking at all these attributes that you looked at? What would be kind of the next great model to come out? What type of car would it be?
I mean, from my personal experience, when I went to buy or wanted to buy a battery electric or PHEV, I was pretty open about those options, but there was basically only 5 models to choose from that was affordable and like below $40,000 and gave a decent range. So yeah, it's like even in these choice experiments, what we end up seeing is like there's one thing about this data that we have to keep in mind, that the choice experiments are designed conditional on what the respondents expressed interest as their next vehicle. So it kind of, if you already have a PEV, you know what the market looks like. And if you don't have one, you're completely unaware of like what is possible, or right now is basically they may think that what is out there is unaffordable. So I don't even know if I actually can get it in the next couple of years. So if there are more of these models available, we might see some of these actual concerns also coming up among the general population. They will start caring about these attributes and decide for the right vehicle option.
Got it. Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, we will move on to Jamie Orose. And Jamie's going to talk about accelerating EV adoption in the San Francisco Bay Area, their market research findings. And he is also with the Center for Sustainable Energy. So I asked him what's interesting about his life right now. And he says his personal interests are mostly focused on whatever his 3-year-old daughter wants to do since she runs the show. So turning over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks. I'm real into playing house at the moment. That's my new favorite thing.
How's that going?
Great. It's super fun. Folks see my screen, my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, as Bill mentioned, I am a friend and colleague of John Anderson at the Center for Sustainable Energy. And I'm happy to be here today to present my findings from a market research study that we conducted on behalf of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. I'd like to give special thanks to Rebecca Fisher and Tin Lee at the district, as well as my colleagues at CSE who assisted on this research as well. And there's Eric Fullenkamp and Jennifer Boughton. As John mentioned, CSE has one simple mission: to decarbonize, and our vision is a future with sustainable, equitable, and resilient transportation, buildings, and communities. This research was done in collaboration with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. The Air District is a regional air pollution control agency in Northern California that represents 9 counties surrounding San Francisco Bay. They have been monitoring the air quality and supporting programs to advance clean air since 1955. They have a very aggressive goal to equitably increase the EV market share in their jurisdiction to 90% by 2050. And in lieu of that, they contracted with CSE to do EV market research, which in part informed the EV acceleration plan that they released in March of 2021. The purpose of this research was to understand both the Air District as a whole, as well as to understand the perspectives of key priority populations known to have barriers to EV adoption. The primary research conducted for this study was an overall survey of residents of the Bay Area with specific focus on apartment dwellers, low to moderate income residents, who for the study we defined as respondents whose gross family income was under $100,000 per year, and non-traditional commuters, who we defined as respondents whose primary commute method is not personal vehicle travel, or they supplement their personal vehicle travel with other commute methods. The objectives of this survey were to identify specific factors that influence consumer car buying decisions, assess awareness of EV incentives, models, and charging stations, and identify barriers to EV adoption, and to assess which incentive structures would most influence EV adoption. We commissioned a market research panel from the Air District service area. We used non-probability quota sampling to gather an adequate number of respondents from each priority population, and we established those quotas using the American Community Survey. Overall, we received 1,004 responses to the survey, and those responses were analyzed across priority populations, with testing conducted to determine the significance of differences between them. In addition, we did a separate survey of 185 ride-hail drivers to examine these objectives with this audience. And lastly, we conducted focus groups and interviews with other key stakeholder groups thought to be able to facilitate EV expansion. However, for the purposes of time, we're going to focus on these survey results today. So what did we learn? Again, we defined non-traditional commuters as people whose primary commute is not driving alone, or they supplement with other methods. However, we did see that even traditional commuters supplement their primary commutes from time to time. Overall, this was 44% of respondents. And of this group, you would see that regardless of primary commute method, respondents often supplemented their commutes with other vehicle-based travel, like carpooling, riding in company vehicles, or using ride-hailing services. This shows an opportunity for expansion of EVs to those who prefer other cleaner primary commute methods. The following slides are going to show findings related to the respondents' vehicle purchasing decisions. This slide shows the 6 most important factors overall that influenced car buying decisions. No significant differences existed between priority populations in terms of these factors. And you'll see these are more traditional motivations like cost, safety, and dependability. You won't see reducing environmental impacts here. That is a commonly associated factor attributed to EV owners. However, it was not one of the top factors identified in the survey. This slide is showing what respondents indicated was the maximum purchase price they would pay for a vehicle. You see significant differences exist here, quite large differences between income groups. And while not statistically significant, we did see fairly large differences on the average purchase price for non-apartment dwellers and apartment dwellers. This slide shows the preference between new and used vehicles, and you'll see again significant differences between income groups and fairly large differences among apartment dwellers in whether they are most likely to acquire a new or a used vehicle the next time they purchase one. In addition to their vehicle purchasing decisions, we explored respondents' familiarity with and estimated impacts of EV incentives on their decision to adopt. The most significant differences in awareness of most common federal state EV incentives was between income groups. Lower income residents were significantly less likely to be familiar with federal tax credits or state incentives for EVs or HOV lane access stickers than higher income respondents. And while fairly distinct differences existed among apartment dwellers, the only significant difference was found with familiarity with HOV lane access. You're also probably beginning to notice that we saw less difference between traditional and non-traditional commuters across the board in these findings. Respondents were then asked to rank possible EV incentive structures in order of how likely they were to influence their decision to get an EV. And we did see some interesting differences between target populations and what incentives might influence them. The top incentive structures were the same across priority populations with discounts off new EVs or tax credits. However, you'll see the overall population ranked home charging equipment discounts as number 3 overall, and our priority populations found those less influential. Subsequently, you'll see other financial incentives for vehicle acquisition would be more influential to our groups, notably attracting financing offers and used EV incentives. Next, we'll look at these results for ride-hail drivers. On the left, the slides here on the left, you'll see the most important vehicle decision factors from our resident survey. When we compared that to ride-hail drivers, we did notice some key differences. Notably, fuel costs were ride-hail drivers' most important factor in their car buying decision, most likely due to the impacts of fuel costs on their earnings. They also valued technology and comfort more than the general population, most likely due to the amount of time they spend driving. Ride-hail drivers were also more likely to have familiarity with EV incentives than other groups. They were more likely to be aware of federal, state EV incentives and HOV lane access than other priority populations. Our assumption is that this is due to the fact that they drive for a living to some degree, and that vehicle discounts or ways to lower the costs of vehicle acquisition and maintenance impacts their bottom line, and so they may be more likely to know about these things. We also asked the ride-hail drivers what incentive structures they would rank, and how likely they were to influence their decision to get an EV. You'll see the discounts off the price of a new EV are still ranked the highest. However, other incentives related to decreased charging costs or increased ride-hail earnings were also ranked as highly influential. So nuggets to help folks make more money in the ride-hail space were incentives that would move the needle. As a follow-up, we did ask ride-hail drivers questions about how much of an additional per trip incentive would move the needle in their likelihood to consider an EV. This chart shows that 71% said they would want $5 or more per trip to consider an EV. We looked at some incentive structures that Lyft and Uber were piloting at the time, and that's quite a bit more than the per trip incentives they were offering at the time. And so this shows, while it might be ideal to have $5 to $10 additional per trip, there might be a disconnect between what ride-hail drivers or other incentive entities might be willing to provide. Thank you very much. In our full report, you can find more information about the Bay Area residents, ride-hail drivers surveyed. We have information about brand awareness, access to EV charging. Bill, you were asking about sort of when the decision-making timeline. We have information around that. And we more thoroughly explain our methods there as well. And you can also learn more about this key stakeholder groups and the findings from our research around property owners and vehicle fleet managers and car dealerships. If you want links to our report or the amazing EV acceleration plan from the Air District, those links are here as well.
Fantastic. All right. I gave everybody a pretty big challenge here to get done in about 8 to 10 minutes, and they're doing a great job. So let me give you a quick follow-up question. So one of the issues that continues to come up is whether people buy new cars or used cars. And so our research, and I think yours reflected this, but you can tell me, what percentage actually buy new cars at the end of the day? Out of, if there's 100% new registrations, how many of those are new?
The last stat I remember off the top of my head, I think it was 17%, roughly around there, are new car purchases. And those subsequently then feed the used market. So not a lot. Yeah, the new car market is not the largest segment for sure, but it's the feeder to the rest of the market.
Exactly.
So still very important, right?
Yeah. So it gets really interesting. Our data shows around 30%, but that was also a couple of years ago. And the intent to buy new is way higher than the actual purchase. So people just realize that that's too expensive. So fantastic. All right, moving to our fourth and final speaker before we get into broader Q&A is Dr. Margaret Taylor. And I took this right off of an article, Margaret. It says, by day, Margaret Taylor is an expert in clean, you know where I'm going with this? An expert in clean energy innovation decision science for Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. But by night, she is a ballerina hard at work on refining her pliés and pas de deux technique. Is there any truth to that, or was that just social media going off?
That was in the U.S. Department of Energy's social media feed, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my my career path not chosen.
Got it. All right. Well, hopefully we're very happy that you chose this one instead. So, all right.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And this will not be about ballet, but will be about consumer decision making around new vehicle purchases in general, and thinking about where environmental attributes fit in the purchase process. So this is a paper and a research stream being funded by the Environmental Protection Agency, and Dina Jackman is one of the key authors on this project, and she's in the audience. I just want to thank Dina so much for being able to get this research stream off the ground. But anything I say will be my own fault and not that of the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Energy or anybody else. Okay, so I don't know why okay, let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, so the motivation for this. So we see that the environmental impacts of the U.S. light-duty vehicle fleet improved considerably over the last couple decades. And one reason for this has to be, in part, people purchasing new, greener cars. So the broader research stream is sort of, how do Americans think about the greenness of a new car when they're looking to buy one? And how do they trade off greenness with other shopping criteria? So we have this model of the purchase decision process builds off of the EKB model from marketing. So problem recognition, are you going to buy a new, do I need to buy a car at all? Do I have other mobility options? What is the definition of that problem? Then you go through a search process. So, if you don't have a lot of time to make a decision, you might just rely on heuristics, rules of thumb, go quick. And that might be, you'll just draw on your internal idea of the world of cars versus external sources. Then you'll go through once you've sort of figured out, am I only going to look at one option or multiple options? How will I apply criteria to that? What goes into my actual purchase? I will go from ones that I think I like, ones I'm kind of indifferent to, and ones I hate. That can actually get influenced at the point of the purchase at the dealers. And then after a purchase, your level of satisfaction with what you thought you're going to get will really affect this whole process, and especially go back into that internal search part of this. So this is the general model that we've been drawing from. This particular project is really focuses on alternative evaluation. So consumers with heterogeneous demographic and other characteristics, they derive, weight, and apply criteria across alternative vehicles. And these vehicles are comprised of a bundle of attributes. So just sort of a way to break down this space. So the methods we're using We have the Strategic Vision New Vehicle Experience Survey for model years 2014 to 2016, 250,000 plus respondents per year with perspectives on new cars purchased within the last 6 months. And the whole survey is really extensive. It's got 3 questionnaires, about 19 pages long, plus associated technical data. It can be quite an overwhelming survey to work with. Our approach has been to examine the environmental attributes within the broader set of vehicle purchase criteria, including safety, performance, value, et cetera. And the techniques we're using to date are primarily the analytic hierarchy process informed by exploratory factor analysis. And we're starting to work on this next part of this, which is technique for order of preference by similarity to ideal solution. The way to think of these 2 methods, AHP and TOPSIS, is that here's that bundle of attributes in a car. And these are the shopping criteria that people are looking at. And they're hoping that these criteria are connected to these attributes. But AHP, what it does is really speaks to the criteria weighting that individuals have. It allows you to then construct an ideal car. And then we also know what they actually bought, and we can understand about what is that distance from the ideal. So what we'll be talking about is that criteria weighting in these next slides. This is way too detailed to go into, but I really think it's beautiful and would recommend that any questions on this, we would like to talk more with Dana. The main things I wanted to emphasize here is that we have a very large N. And so even when we have only like, say, less than 1% or BEVs, for example, we still end up in the 30,000 range. Other things to note here is the general gas buyer is the general population. And as you see, the age doesn't really change much for new vehicle buyers, despite whatever the alternative fuel. And same thing for things like household size. Anyway, so we can come back to that at another time if you're curious. These are the shopping criteria that emerge from exploratory factor analysis and also align with the literature. So you'll be seeing in these next set of slides some of the relative criteria weighting. We're going to do it first by decision maker characteristics, then we'll break them down by some of the technology things and some interesting findings on how people think of the environment and the difference that the framing of the question can make in relative shopping criteria. So the way to read these next set of slides is that if people weighed their criteria the same, all of these histogram bars would be at this level because we have 10 criteria here. Our criteria are the interior design, the performance of the car, the power of the car, the durability of the car's safety, the value for the money, the seat comfort, the vehicle image, what it says about you and about the vehicle, the environmental aspect of it, and the fuel economy. This is, we could show you a lot more about the questions. We don't have a lot of time, but so some real, I'm just going to run through these a bit. So here we see women have, here we just have the gender, female, male split, and the income one's particularly, I think, interesting. So if you break it down by lower income to the higher income, and you look at these last two, the environmental and fuel economy, it's just, it's very interesting to see, for example, where fuel economy sits for lower income to where it sits for the higher income. Same thing for environment. And that's kind of an interesting one when you think about how expensive the cars can be and where we sort of see moving the market on some of this. Here's by technological attributes of the shopping outcomes. We have a lot more passenger vehicles than trucks in this sample, but you can see that where fuel economy sits and environment sits for passenger vehicles and trucks. And then I think this one's very interesting with the different fuel types. We can see the HEV buyers really value fuel economy quite a lot, as do the PHEVs. But you can see that how the environmental one actually is more important for the PHEVs, and how the BEV people don't actually care as much about fuel economy, which might make sense because you don't have to go to the gas station. You can just plug it into your house. Especially since most cars even though people maybe when they are thinking about buying it, don't think the range will accommodate them, but the actual range, typically does pretty much, especially in a portfolio approach to a car. Anyway, I'm just flying through these, but we can look at these more in detail if you want in the breakout room afterwards. And I just want to end with some thoughts on these. I feel a social responsibility to choose a vehicle that is environmentally friendly. These are ranked by the weakest agreement with that statement is the 1s, and the strongest agreement with this statement is the 5s. So the people who feel a social responsibility to choose a vehicle that is environmentally friendly, if you really don't agree with that very strongly, here's where you are on environment and fuel economy. And if you feel very strongly about this, you end up with, you can kind of see how this varies. But that's if you frame it around social responsibility. But if you do it this way, where the environmental concerns are overblown, so I don't think we need to be so concerned, we've switched the order on you here so that these would be the people who most strongly think it's overblown, and versus most weakly agree that environment is overblown. You can kind of see how that works out in terms of fuel economy, and especially when you compare it to the previous slide, how much the framing of the question makes a difference. We can, again, play with these more later. And then this is the people who would, despite whether it's overblown or whether they think they have a social responsibility, this is the people who would pay significantly more. And this time we put it back to, the weakest agreement. So, I would be very weakly likely to pay significantly more versus much more likely to pay significantly more. And you can see here how that varies. It's and where fuel economy always goes against this. So anyway, some last kind of descriptive things that are kind of interesting. If environmental friendliness is not at all important to the vehicle purchase decision, we see the highest relative weights to the criteria of performance, value, and durability. So this is what people think they're trading off most in terms of their shopping criteria approach. And if environmental friendliness is important or extremely important, they put significantly lower relative weight on durability and to a lesser degree on performance and value, which is we thought was kind of interesting. Our next steps, we're beginning extending this analysis to see how the attributes of other household vehicles in the home relate to these shopping criteria and what they actually purchase, and we'll be continuing along with some of this TOPSIS work, which we already have some interesting insights into, but didn't think we'd have time in 8 minutes. And I have no idea where I am right now in 8 minutes. So I apologize if I am far over, but there's more to come on this project, and I'd be really happy to answer any questions.
But you were right at 10.5 minutes. So I was about to cowbell you, but very, very close. No, that's fine. We're all doing well. So, questions, I'm going to ask a question of all of you. I asked Priya already, but if there was one car model that seems to be missing from availability and good price, what is that model? So Jamie, can we start with you?
Yeah, there's a couple I think come to mind. The RAV4 Prime's making moves right now that suggest the SUVs, but I think, me being a new father and John and minivans, I think are a big gap area at the moment. Yeah,
Jamie, minivans aren't a thing anymore. So sorry about that. Someone else asked me about that. Yeah. My son's in the market for that as well. And so, John, what's your take?
I think in terms of models, the pickup truck market is kind of an elephant in the room in terms of EVs. Of course, we've got some high profile pickups on the horizon here, but that's a kind of a vehicle utility space that hasn't been addressed by the EV market yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Margaret, given all the attribute work, what attributes are missing? What car has the attributes that people really seem to want?
Can I just share something real quick with you?
I don't think so.
So this is actually if you already, this is what you bought and this is what you're most likely considered, we have that down to like 3 vehicles. And you can, but so it's kind of interesting is sort of the body type stuff and how, especially on the SUVs, people are just not likely to think of another SUV, but it's, I mean, like you're, look how solid the blocks are. I mean, I said the opposite of what I meant, but people really anchor on certain body types, and SUVs
Yes, they
hold
do.
up really strongly. Unlike 4-door cars, they switch around more. It'd be
Yep.
great to get a convertible in there. That's one
Yeah.
people play with a lot. Disregard.
Yeah, and we asked an open-ended question about what model do you expect to get next, and certainly most recently it's the crossover SUV that's missing, whether midsize or large, and that is really something that is not readily available for good price in the market today. So the RAV4 mentioned, I think, was great. Another question I have for you all is really about the targeting, the segmentation and the targeting, which is, we're finding, when you find a group of people who likes an environmental message or a performance message, you need to find them, right? You need to find them. So, we have our own methodologies to do that. But what have you seen work in the marketplace as far as finding the right buyers to the right model? What tools, what approaches? Anybody have an answer to that? I know it's very applied to all the things you're talking about, but volunteer if you wish. No. All right.
I'll take a swing at it. At CSC, we do a lot of work going out and meeting consumers in places where that aren't necessarily car centric, right? So we've historically done a lot of work doing outreach at community events and things like that. We're working with a pretty large community-based organization network now in terms of trying to raise awareness about the Clean Vehicle Rebate Project and other programs. And I think one of our aims over the next year is to start to better understand what people who aren't participating in the EV market need, what's missing, in addition to the awareness stuff we've been talking about today, if there are any like features or characteristics that just aren't being addressed right now. So that's kind of an increasing focus for us over time here.
Fantastic. And I'm going to do that poll question we didn't get in the first. Can you put that poll question up that was about range anxiety? I found this particularly interesting. So this is a little quiz. We'll see who gets it right. So do you know what I'm talking about? Yep. So in our national EV survey, we asked which of these would most ease your concerns about how far you could drive, essentially run out of power, how far you could drive an all-electric vehicle. Which one got the highest percentage out of all of these? We had more options, but these were the ones I decided to put on here, especially the last one. All right.
So we've got about 12 respondents out of maybe 25 people on the call.
Yep. All right. So what we have is you guys are actually correct. A portable charger to carry with you, which just seems ironic to me, but it was definitely the highest. And thank you all for not choosing a book about how to hitchhike safely and effectively. That was not the right answer. We also got a lot of votes for the app that shows where the closest available, but those are generally available already. The portable charger, they actually want to carry a gas can in their back seat instead of putting it essentially permanently in the car. I don't know how that works or how it makes sense, but from a psychological standpoint, it was this thing that's going to help them most.